everyone, welcome back to another episode of LA Legal. I'm Liana, joined by Nima and Nima's friend Alaleh. Please go ahead and introduce yourself to our viewers and we'll get started.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alaleh Kamran. I'm a criminal defense attorney based here in Los Angeles, and I've been practicing for the last 32 years. I practice state and federal, and
And so you started practicing when you were, what, like 3 years old?
4.5.
4.5. Alaleh is one of my good friends, one of the best lawyers here in town, and most importantly, a big Ted Bundy fan. So we're so excited to have you
Such
on
a
the show.
big fan that the email, I could sense your excitement. And I thought I was like the resident serial killer,
Ted Bundy is a
Fanatic.
fascinating character.
He
Fascinating.
really is. So if you haven't gathered yet, we will be talking about Ted Bundy. And as you know, here's a quick intro and we'll dive right in. So Ted Bundy was born Theodore Robert Cowell. He was born November 24th, 1946 in Burlington, Vermont. His mother was Eleanor, and his father's identity has never been confirmed. Bundy grew up in the care of his grandparents, and he was under the impression that they were his real parents, and his actual mother was his older sister. Bundy eventually discovered the truth and expressed a lifelong resentment towards both his father for abandoning him, and of course his mother and all of the women in his life. So I think this kind of sets the stage for some of his motive for what he did. So let's take it away. Nima, you look like you want to say something.
Yeah, I mean, look, Ted Bundy, I mean, he killed so many women, right? And we're going to talk about that. We're going to confess to almost 30. But what fascinates me about him is, obviously, I'm a lawyer. I'm a nerd. I mean, he did a couple years of law school. He's a lot more sophisticated and certainly a lot more educated than most of the serial killers we've been covering. And he had a lot of fans, and I'm not saying Manson had fans, even Richard Ramirez. I mean, they have fans, but Ted Bundy, I think, was very well liked, maybe because he was probably one of the best looking of the serial killers.
He was good looking. He was upper class, upper middle class. He was educated. He was charming. He was eloquent. He did not fit in any of the categories that we were used to seeing in 1974. We couldn't categorize him as a criminal.
Yeah, I mean, typically, and he did suffer obviously some abuse, and I'm sure we're going to talk about that. But we really expect, like you said, some people who suffered severe physical sexual abuse at a young age. This really bad traumas, very broken homes, and obviously there's mental health issues, and I'm sure we're going to dive right into that. But again, not your typical serial killer, college student, law student. So where do things go sideways here?
Political activist,
Republican.
He was,
Republican.
okay, well, this is not that kind of a podcast. But he was actually pulled over in Utah, and the officer thought, some of the things in his car, we'll get to it, were suspicious, let him go, because he was like, nah, this is like a stand-up lawyer, like a law student, and so they let him go. I mean, if that is not the theme for this whole thing, I don't know what is, that little fact right there.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen it with, Gabby Petito and Brian Laundrie, and, we know how, and again, not that type of podcast, but we know how minorities and people of color are treated, and this is a good-looking white boy from all over Washington, Utah, ultimately ended up in Florida. But
the detectives that were interviewed regarding this case, because they received a lot of tips, and Ted Bundy kept showing up on their radar, and they kept looking at his profile, and they kept dismissing it because he didn't fit the character of the killer that they were looking for. So maybe if those biases, and when I was researching this character, it brought home to me that our institutional biases and prejudices, and this was a perfect case for that kind of proving the institutional biases and prejudices that we have. And had they actually put those things aside and looked at the facts as they were being presented, Ted Bundy would have been arrested a long time prior to a lot of those other murders.
I mean, his longtime girlfriend called in and put in a tip saying, this is your guy. And again, they dismissed her as well. So
yeah, we talked about in other podcasts. Remember sort of Jeffrey Dahmer, kind of similar situation, it was like, hey, this guy kidnapped me. And then, white guy talks to the police, and all of a sudden, guess what? He's let go. So obviously, big problem even still today. But if you're talking about Wow, 50 years ago. Huge problem back then.
Okay. Well, let's dive in, right? So I think that we can all agree there was like a common scheme, right? He drove around in his tan VW, picked up women, often wore a brace, to signify that he was injured. He asked them to come over and help, which, by the way, I thought is weird, right? Like, I mean, as a woman, you feel bad. You see someone in a brace, you want to go over there and help. But I mean, it's almost kind of like he's appealing to these young, by the way, young, right?
Yeah,
Most of them were
yeah.
like 17, 18, 20.
Mid-20s.
Yeah.
And so he's kind of appealing to their like emotion. Where like, look, I'm hurt. Something's wrong with my car. Come help me. And out of the goodness of their heart, they approach him and he abducts them, takes them to some remote location, attacks, rapes, and kills.
Yeah, Ted Bundy's like sort of the boogeyman when we were kids. Like, don't pick up hitchhikers. I mean,
Yeah,
it's really
that's
because of
probably
it
where
was really
you
because of like
could-
Ted Bundy, right? Obviously, we know some other serial killers engaged in similar conduct, but it was really kind of Ted Bundy that sort of laid the trap for these young women. Many of them look the same, like you said, same age, same hair, right?
Brown,
Yeah.
parted down the middle.
Yeah.
In the mid-20s. And part of the what he was doing to these women is that he would decapitate them and keep the heads as mementos in his apartment. So they found those in his apartment, and then he would go back to the bodies.
Jeffrey
And
Dahmer territory.
yeah, Jeffrey, exactly. And he
Yeah.
would go back to the bodies, and he would have sexual contact with these bodies until such time as they started decomposing or the animals got at them.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, what do you say? Well, I mean, here's another thing that I found interesting. Sorry to cut you off. But he, for some of his victims, he shampooed their hair, he painted their nails. So you kind of see this like dichotomy between you're like this crazy, evil, sadistic person, and then also like you're now taking care of the corpse. Like it's very strange behavior. It's almost like his two like personalities trying to reconcile themselves. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I mean, it goes into kind of the mental health issues. I mean, we keep bringing up Dahmer because, I mean, obviously, Dahmer oftentimes was same sex, is different sex, but sort of the decapitation, keeping it. I mean, Dahmer was all over the house, right, in the fridge, and he was more of a chemist. He'd sort of preserve body parts, and but I mean. You do have that similar sort of trophy. Again, you can never get into the mind of a serial killer, but I think those two sort of stand out in my mind, just kind of keeping body parts.
And of all the ones that we've spoken to in the past, those two are, I would say, the most bright of the bunch, right? I mean, one, as you mentioned, is almost like a chemist, like college dropout, but he, his parents are, they send him off to, what was the school? Was he in Utah also? Jeffrey Dahmer? I don't remember. I think he was in Utah. This one is a lawyer or law student. So you kind of have these like two very notorious serial killers who are relatively smart, who kind of keep their victims, and it's like a trophy, and they have like shrines in their homes. It's very interesting to me.
The characteristics, I think they're the brains of how these people work, and there are parallels between Ted Bundy and what was his name? The guy in Silence of the Lambs.
Oh, Hannibal Lecter?
Hannibal Lecter. Thank you so much. There's a scene in Hannibal Lecter in Silence of the Lambs where he's standing outside of his van and trying to move a couch out, and it's raining. That scene was pulled from the Ted Bundy,
Is
from
it
the
really?
Ted Bundy,
haven't seen that
from the
movie.
abductions at Lake Spamish in the summer of, I think it was 1974, 75, because that's how he abducted the girls. He would wear this brace, like you said, and ask them to help him with his sailboat or something like that. So that was completely taken from that. But the fascination that we have with Bundy, as opposed to, I think, the other serial killers, is that his character would morph from a normal human being during the day, from a functional, charming human being who was working at a suicide hotline during the day, to this evil, sadistic sociopath at night. And how to keep those two separate and apart just proves how much more of a sophisticated sociopath and psychopath he is, because only a true psychopath can create that character that exists during the day.
Yeah, I mean, there's no
agree with you.
question. He's, I would say, the most sophisticated. I mean, we're going to talk about his trial, but I mean, the fact that he was able to escape from prison not once but twice. I mean, you're talking about like El Chapo level, and obviously that's really an indictment on the corrections officers and the prison facilities. But I mean, here's someone that obviously jumped from the library and then squeezed through.
12 inch hole,
Yeah.
like a piece. I had to like sit there
I
and
know. I
measure
saw that. I'm
it.
like, I gotta lose some weight,
Yeah.
before the podcast, But
Stop eating the fruit.
yeah, exactly. But I mean, you don't have serial killers like this in terms of how they're plotting and planning. Imagine this guy, like he's sitting next to you in law school, and I'm sure we all thought there were some
And
crazy
that's
serial
the
killers
thing,
in our
though.
class.
Oh, yeah.
But like,
Oh,
But
yeah.
that's what makes him so scary, is that it really puts into perspective the fact that it could be anyone.
yeah,
You know, you just would never know.
So when they were talking to him the night before he's put to death, some reporter that he has personally chosen was interviewing him while hundreds of reporters were outside. And basically, the reporter was asking him, oh my God, I just lost my train of thought. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
What
we'll
were we
come
just
back.
talking about?
we're talking about
it could be
yeah,
anyone.
yeah, it could be anyone. But it was right before he was executed. I think we were talking about when he makes the admission, right, to killing the 30
Oh
girls.
my God, I totally had a forget it. Let it go. We'll
We'll come back to
that.
that.
We'll
We'll
come
come
back
back-
to it.
we'll
But
come back to
it is an important point because obviously when he's sentenced, he denies it. He's like, oh, I'm not going to, accept responsibility or ask for mercy for something I haven't done. That would be silly. But finally, shortly before he's executed, within hours, he does admit to killing 30 women. Now, I don't know if we know the exact, we know at least 20, but potentially 30. I mean, that's a lot of women across a lot of different
lot,
states.
He
across the
admits
country.
to 30. 36 remain unresolved, or I think they think it's him. And then I heard as far as high as 200
Wow.
on one.
I wouldn't.
podcast.
I'm not surprised. I mean, he was all over the country. We have victims in Utah. You have him in Seattle, in some areas of Florida. I mean, he was everywhere. This guy was just like on a mission.
And we've talked about it before, obviously, not to date ourselves, but this was sort of the golden age of serial killers. I mean, the tide has shifted in terms of law enforcement. You have DNA, you have obviously cell phone evidence, there's video everywhere, and this is back in the day, you could barely get a fingerprint from someone.
Yeah.
So,
One of the things, and I just remembered what I wanted to say 2 minutes ago. One of the problems that the detectives had back then, and they were talking about it, is that they didn't have DNA evidence.
Yes.
And the fact that they didn't have DNA evidence, they couldn't connect any of these crimes. But in his interview with this reporter the night before he's put to death, he talks about the effect, and this is where I'm like, I had to take a step back and think. The effect that violent pornography
Oh, yeah.
had on him. And I'm thinking, was our society in 1974 so naive and so basically vanilla and untouched that pornography or violent pornography would trigger and could trigger this type of sadistic, homicidal, serial killing type of behavior? Or is it that we still have this innate urge, it exists within us to kill, but that part of that urge is satisfied because we are playing those deadly video games? Think about that again. Does mankind, if we want to follow like Hobbes, is mankind so nasty and so brutish and so violent that we have this innate need to kill, and part of that is satisfied by playing these video games? Or is it that we're so vanilla and, like Rousseau would say, so virgin and pure that watching pornography would soil you and destroy you and make you into a homicidal killer?
Well, I'll tackle those too. All right, well, let's start with the video games. I was born in the 70s. I can tell you I played a lot of video games, okay? Especially in the 80s.
Did it trigger anything?
No, man, the video games
Look
in the
at
80s.
the man. He went to Harvard.
no.
Let's throw in the Harvard. Come on, I did that one
I
for
haven't
you.
mentioned Harvard
I know,
yet.
I did
should
that
have.
for you.
I usually try to do it the first few minutes in, so thank you for catching that. But look, we're talking about video games in the 80s, right? 70s. it's not the video games we're playing today where you're blowing people's heads off. It's decapitating. I mean, this is like pixelated things.
Right,
You know, I mean, so let's let the video games.
And
aside.
I'm talking about video games right now in the
Oh,
21st century. I'm
oh,
talking about
right
can
now
we
it's not
compare
yet.
it? Can we compare it to the kids taking on to video games right now and satisfying that innate urge for violence?
You know what I think? I think that it starts in the home. And I say this all the time. We have these conversations, right? I think kids are exposed to okay, I have a 2-year-old at home, right? I think kids are born like a blank slate unless, you're on drugs and you're pregnant and we have some serious like mental issues when the child is born, right? The child is exposed to violence, right? Mom and dad are just like at each other all day or whatever, right? So they start picking up these things. And then you factor in societal video games or, violent things that they see online. Then I think it maybe starts to shape in their mind that this is okay, right? I mean, my kid has never seen anybody fight razors, so she's not just gonna all of a sudden go and just be triggered and like bite people and grow up and be a killer, right? That's what I think. I think it's how kids are raised, what they see within the home, and then it's what outside triggers just kind of. No, you disagree?
No, I don't disagree. Here are my thoughts, and I've sort of thought about this a lot, and obviously we talk about this a lot here at the firm and just on TV. I think those same killers exist today. But what was Ted
They just
Bundy?
have AR-15s
yes.
now.
Now it's a Nicholas Cruz, and
Right.
you're a mass shooter instead of. So you're not going to go and kill, just
But these are
over
all
a period of
people
time. You're
who
going to
have
kill
these,
a
like,
lot of people
crazy
in a short
homes.
period of time, and then you're going to get caught, and you're going to get prosecuted, and that's it. You're going to kill a lot of people,
Yeah.
but it's going to be a mass shooter as opposed to a serial killer. That's why I don't think we're going to see serial killers anymore. But they've all just transitioned and
but,
going up to
but
mass
to
shooters.
kind of
They
bring
are
it back to what you mentioned, right? All the Nicholas Cruzes of the world, right? They come from these like broken homes, violent dads, missing parents, or whatever, right? And so they come from this. You're not going to see someone who's been loved and nurtured and taken
course.
care of.
So go back to Ted Bundy now, because Ted Bundy seemingly came from a stable family. Came from, even though, I mean, he found out later on that his
Yeah.
older
Well, his
sister is
grandfather, who was his, or he thought he was his dad, was actually abusive. Until
There-
4 years
there-
old,
there-
he
there
lived
was
with-
some
so I
abuse.
think there was some
There
abuse.
was
So
some.
maybe,
and there's some indication that the grandfather was actually the father, the
father.
dad.
Okay.
well,
There's
there you
some
go.
indication.
There's some incest for you.
Yeah, there's some
That's
incest.
all. No, it's sad. I think that's a really important question. It's a great question because it's kind of like where does this come from, right? Because when you don't have these weird violent urges, right? You think how like that, and that's what my fascination personally is with serial killers because I can't understand. I can't seem to get into their mind to think, wow, what leads you from point A to point B where you kill someone and then you want more.
Of course.
I don't know that I used to agree with you that people are born with a clean slate and it's environmental, social, and other factors that make them into good people or bad people. I think after 32 years of practice in criminal cases, I've done a lot of violent crimes. I do now believe that some people are just born
bad.
evil. There's some bad seeds. They're just, I mean, we're completely not getting away from Ted Bundy, but I no longer believe that we are
That's
born with a clean slate.
Well, I'd like to keep my vanilla mindset. It just makes me go through the world. But
Yeah, no,
That's a valid
and
point.
regardless of whether it's like a nature or nurture thing, it kind of goes back to, okay, well, you have the killer, you have the means of killing, right? The weapons and that type of thing. And then you kind of have, and I want to kind of go back to, we talked about lack of DNA, but a little bit of law enforcement response, right? So law enforcement in some ways dropped the ball because of his profile. In other ways, they don't have the tools, right? And ultimately, when he is finally convicted and put to death, right? What evidence do they have? It's really his dental records, right? Finally, yeah. And you can still use dental records, and they'll still use it today if like the body is completely like,
But they didn't have the bodies. This is the problem.
Yeah, no, but-
they didn't have bodies.
Yeah.
They didn't have remnants.
but they had his bite
they
marks.
had the two bodies
Yeah.
from Florida.
Yeah,
Right.
the two for
And that's what connected it.
Yeah.
But other than that,
That-
they-
that's
Well,
it.
in fact, you know what I thought was funny is they kept giving him fruit, right, to see like how, and then an inmate was like, "Hey, I don't get fruit," and that's what put him on notice that hey, they're trying to get my my teeth marks, and so he stopped eating the fruit in prison. So I thought, He's smart, see?
He's smart, very smart,
very
very
smart.
smart. I mean, look when he's examining himself, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's just. Yeah, I don't know what it is, if it's like, bipolar, schizophrenic, but like
Yeah.
he's,
Something is
it's
serious.
attorney witness rule.
Brilliant.
You can't do
Brilliant.
it.
The fact that he was able to get married on
yeah.
a technicality in an open court, I just thought it was brilliant. And
Yeah.
he is a brilliant man. Look, just for somebody who went to law school for only a year and a half, 2 years, the way he's conducting himself in court, he's far more competent than a lot of attorneys that we see in court,
Yeah, no, the marriage was obviously fascinating. The fact that he was able to get legally married, the fact that he was able to have a kid on death row.
And she said, the wife said, Pat Boo, what's her name?
Yeah.
She said that the guards,
Yeah,
they didn't care. They would let her in.
I'm just shaking my head. I mean, it's
Yeah.
unbelievable.
That's the former federal
That is
prosecutor.
that's like my like Jeff Epstein. I mean, do your job anyway. So
Well, let's kind of talk a little bit about just some of the killings, some of the crimes, and then we'll get into the capture and ultimately the trial, because that's what this podcast is about. But he starts off, his initial killings are in the nighttime, and then he's just kind of like, I'm going to do this during the day, right? He kidnaps women from a park. In fact, 2 of his victims were able to get away, which I thought was incredibly fascinating because it did not slow him down.
Yeah.
So the thought that they may potentially go rat him out, contact law enforcement, one of them didn't for religious purposes, but the other one, I mean, it did not slow him down. In fact, he went off and the next day
yeah,
Some more.
did some more, multiple
yeah.
more.
This was it the handcuff one, the police officer, right? When
Yeah,
he was
yes, yeah.
Well, that
Carol,
one,
I think her name was.
that one, I think he ended up being convicted, and he got 1 to 15.
15.
Yes.
Yeah, that
Yes.
was the first
Yeah.
escape.
Yeah.
So the first escape.
Yeah, who gets 1 to 15? I don't think.
No, that was
I
the
know.
second one.
I
The,
saw
the
those.
first one was Rhonda. She's the one who didn't say anything.
Was that in Utah? Yeah, the one.
Utah. No.
Rhonda is
Utah.
the one who fell in the river.
Rhonda is the one who fell in the river, and she, for religious purposes, she said that I didn't want to come out and say anything. Carol is the second one, and he gets 1 to 15, and then that's where he escapes
Yeah.
Right.
from prison.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
He was his own lawyer. He had access to the library. And then he climbs out of the window. He jumps.
Just that itself is brilliant.
Well,
Yeah, and then but it's really the second escape where he goes to Florida,
Yeah.
then he's at Florida State, and just like a whole nother reign of terror on the other side of the country. It's just shocking.
Do you guys think that he at that point was like, all right, they're on to me, I'm just going to terrorize as many women as quickly as I possibly can? Right, when he gets to Florida, he goes to the sorority house. That's where we have the 2 victims with the bite marks. What
I
do you guys
don't
think?
know if he's thinking they're on to me. I think that these urges and the sexual urges and the urge to kill, they are so strong and they are so overwhelming that he, even if he thinks he's on limited time, he thinks that he needs to satisfy these
His
urges
urges.
as soon as he can, because maybe if he's incarcerated, he's not going to be able to satisfy these urges
Yeah.
anymore.
Yeah, it's true. I think it has to be some sort of irresistible urge. Otherwise, like any rational person would be like, I'm out of here.
Yeah.
I'm going to wherever
It's like the
non-extradition
Golden
country.
State
Yeah,
Killer,
exactly.
the Golden State Killer. Once he realized they were onto him, he kind of like disappeared and went into retirement.
Yeah.
Dude, go into retirement already.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be like smoking cigars in Cuba or something. What's this guy
Yeah.
doing? But
Oh, that was a plot line from Silence of the Lambs, wasn't it?
Oh, it was?
I think
You're
it
going
was.
to really make me want to go home
Yeah,
and watch
I-
this
I gotta go
movie.
rewatch
Oh,
it. Yeah.
And
great
I
movie.
refuse. I don't know. Is it a scary movie?
it's very scary.
Oh, then no.
It's totally
amazing.
Ted
I'm out.
Bundy. It's totally Ted
Now I'm
Bundy.
gonna rewatch it now because obviously I saw it when I was younger and with Ted Bundy in mind.
Oh, Lord.
You
no,
know,
I refuse.
when the interview with him the night before he's executed is fascinating, because he's trying to accept responsibility and he cannot. He's trying to show remorse, but he cannot. And he's talking about how okay, fine, you can put me to death, but please understand that this violent pornography out there is building and creating all these killers out there. Y'all, let me give you some kind of word of notice here, advice. Get the porn off the streets. It's like, where did you find this religious, angle suddenly? It's a very narcissistic. It's like,
I'm just thinking of the old '70s porn, like the sticky magazines,
Was it?
the VHS and Betamax, whatever they
Was
had
it
back then.
Dahmer that got baptized in prison? Before? Was it Dahmer?
Was it? No?
Somebody.
I'm getting my.
I know
serial
we've
killers-
talked
I
about
know,
way too
we've
many
talked
serious.
about-
Somebody got baptized. It just kind of made me think of that. Like, why everyone's turning to God all of a
I
sudden?
really
you
want to
Like,
know.
right?
I'm really interested, and if anybody has it, please provide it to me. What did violent porn in the 1970s look like? Because we're in
I'm
the
sure it's just
two-
a Google search away, but I don't know if you want to look.
Well, there's obviously no internet back then. You have your magazines and books,
Yeah.
right? I don't know how like, it's like a flip book. I
what
don't know how
is
violent. I mean, it's a picture. I don't know, man. I just the whole thing doesn't make
Okay,
it. Doesn't
this
make any
segment,
sense.
please, rated R. This episode
Yeah,
alone.
I don't think 12-year-olds are watching
Yeah,
Ted
exactly.
Bundy's.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about the trial because I know we have to start wrapping up. But Nima, go ahead. This is like what you live for.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, for us, when a criminal defendant represents himself, I mean, whether believe it was a shit show, like it doesn't matter. I mean, I don't care if you're, Alex Murdoch. I mean, you're someone that's practicing, you don't do it, right? So now you have this guy who's representing himself, and then he's examining himself, referring to himself in the third person. I'm really surprised the jury took as long as it did because obviously he's likable, he's sophisticated, but I mean the dental records, you see, it's an exact match. It's crystal clear. It's this guy. Obviously tried to get the evidence excluded, like any good defense attorney would. Judge let it in, and really it was based on that. It was clear. I mean, you are the person that bit these women. He didn't eat them like Dahmer, but he at least bit into them. So
He left a signature.
yeah.
Well, I thought the search warrant was interesting. They essentially got like a search warrant for his mouth, right?
Yeah.
And the judge put any and all force necessary,
Yeah.
allowing the officers to use.
And so
I thought that was fascinating.
Ken Kitsasis or whatever his
Yeah.
name is, the
Consultations.
that thank you so much for that. I guess the sheriff. He was when they were talking to him. He was so excited about how he had built this cell for Ted Bundy. And again, you have to go do those parallels with Silence of the Lambs. How they were all reinforced with steel. Over and under and above and below, and to make sure that there are no light fixtures, and how the food was brought in and brought out. It's exactly, and he was taking great pleasure in describing what he had done to get the search warrant and to get the dental records. Basically was, I brought down this killer, and the satisfaction in his face when he was describing what he had
And
done.
I think I know which interview you're talking about because he said, when I went to the morgue and I saw the two bodies, I immediately thought of the two little girls I have at home.
Yeah.
And I promised myself that I'm going to find who did this. And so I think it gave him that extra sort of push or motivation
Correct.
to really hammer in on this guy or whoever had done it. But
Yeah,
I think he
I mean, give credit where credit's due. I mean, Florida law enforcement officials were able to apprehend him when,
unlike who?
unlike the folks in Utah. And
Well,
the
no,
folks in
what was her
Washington.
name? We just did a episode on her.
Which one?
The Florida girl.
Oh,
Casey. Unlike Casey Anthony.
Oh,
yeah.
Casey. Yeah.
Florida got it right at least
Oh,
one time.
Florida. Yeah,
Why
you
is it
mean
that
you
every
mean a Florida
case
jury?
ends up in Florida?
Yeah.
Somebody tell
Well,
me
all the-
why?
yeah,
Why do
yeah.
all roads end up in Florida?
Yeah, I mean Florida. Yeah, Casey Anthony. You had
lot of
who was it? Trayvon Martin, right? Stand Your
Yeah.
Ground was there. There's been a lot of crazy jury verdicts
Yeah.
in
A
Florida.
lot
So
of-
thank God Florida got
you.
it right.
Florida, you did right this time. But yeah, so any thoughts about the trial? I know we've kind of talked about here and there.
No, but not the trial. What fascinates me about the trial again is not so much the evidence or the presentation of the evidence, but it's the way he would manage around the courtroom and the way he would talk and the way he would
The arrogance, right?
the arrogance and people bought it. Granted, they came back with the guilty verdict, but it added to his charm. It added to his mystique, I want to say.
Yeah, I mean a lot of people we were talking about off camera say this is a terrible, terrible thing to say, but like the greatest of all the serial killers, or at least probably one of the most
One of-
famous, if not the most famous. So
Yeah.
he's still kind of, even many, many years later, he still lives in infamy. And he has that lore and that mystique about him.
Yeah, look, they just did a bunch of bunch of Netflix did a
Yeah.
series, a
Yeah.
bunch of
Well, they did a movie too a few years ago, and they cast God, I suck at celebrity names, but the guy from High School Musical, you'll know.
right.
Anyway, the guy from High School Musical, what's his name? He's like, no, like Zac Efron. Yeah, the like really
Zac
cute,
Efron, that's
like
correct.
of
Oh,
course
yeah,
they would.
it was
They
Zac Efron.
Zac Efron, he did a great job in
Yeah,
the
good
movie.
looking guy. So.
The
Yeah.
one thing about this case was the fact that he had a girlfriend for so long,
Yeah.
and that he was so loving towards her and her daughter. And how again this splits in the personalities, and how this woman and her daughter could not reconcile the fact that this is the serial killer that she loves and she lives with. I don't know if we have the same type of parallel with other killers, where other killers have been able to have this type of dividing wall between their personal relationships and the killings.
I think
Do you-
Dahmer did with the one of his victims, and the reason he became a victim was because he tried to dump him. I remember talking about this, but it was very brief. It was not like a long-term
this was
relationship.
5 years,
Yeah,
5 or
this
6
was
years.
just like a brief. But I
Yeah,
can't think of
I
anyone
mean,
else.
it's he definitely presented the best, certainly of all of them.
Yeah.
He's no Richard Ramirez,
No.
Night Stalker.
Oh
You know,
gosh. So let me ask you this, Alaleh, and we've spoken about this before, so I'm going to ask you. But what do you think is or was the appeal of someone like Ted Bundy, other than the obvious, right? So you have someone who now is convicted of very brutal murders, right? Yet he still has fans, right? A lot of these serial killers have women who write to them. They like throw themselves at these men. What is it? What is this fascination, do you think, with someone like Ted Bundy, other serial killers?
There's I think we need to distinguish between fascination and being a fan as liking somebody.
Okay.
I don't know that his fan base for liking him is that great. I think the fascination is great, and the reason why we're fascinated, and I have to state the obvious, which has been talked about. I think it's because he could be any one of us, anyone that we know and hang around with. And because he's so close to home and he's so close to our comfort zone, he becomes the stuff nightmares are made of. Because it could be look to the left, look to the right, it could be there. I think that's where the fascination comes from. But also, there is a category of women, and I'm sorry to say, and I'm very sad to say, who like men that are violent and abusive, and they see that as a show of force, but maybe not to the extent of becoming a killer. But I think women, there are a lot of women who have grown up with the notion that the definition of a real man is one who is rough, tough, and beats up other men. Violence is a sign of strength and a sign of love. And that is a very sick way of thinking, but unfortunately that is a sign that it exists and is pervasive in the community. Especially, I mean, I'm a woman, a minority woman, and I come from a community that sees men like that as powerful women, as powerful men. So if you take that argument to its logical conclusion, you will see where the fascination comes with men like that.
Got it. Well, I think that was very well said. And I think that's a fantastic place to end. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you had
you for
fun.
having
We
me.
loved having you.
Thank you, Alaleh. Love having you. So glad that you made it on the show, and I'm excited to have you on real soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye,
And for all of you
everyone.
viewers, we'll see you next time. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.